There is no one that doubts we are living in difficult times. Evil and corruption is rampant on every level. And more specifically, the fitrah of the human being, the natural disposition of mankind has been distorted so badly. Sexual deviation has become a widespread matter. Deviance in sexual matters has only happened twice in history. In the time of Lut alayhi salam, and in this time that we live in now, starting only from a few decades ago. Today, a male can marry a male and have the marriage legally registered, and they are issued a marriage certificate. A woman can do the same thing and marry another woman like her and have the marriage certificate issued to them. Today people can change their gender from male to female and from female to male. And there are about 68 genders in today's world. Wallah Azza wa Jal, He only said, وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى. He only created the male and the female. And I want to begin tonight's discussion. The first point is, how did homosexuality go from being illegal and a crime punished by law, how did it go from that to becoming decriminalized, and it became legal, and now it's legally recognized by the majority of the world? How did this happen? First and foremost, keep in mind this. Any evil that goes from evil to something good, there is definitely the hands of the shaitan at work. And the shayateen of two types, of jinn kind and mankind. Because there is shayateen from here and shayateen from here. That's number one. A shaitan's role is to continuously decorate deeds for those who desire them. This is what a shaitan does. He decorates the deeds. He decorated to Adam alayhi salam. When Allah Azza wa Jal had forbid him from the tree, a shaitan would say to Adam that this is a tree, if you ate from it, you will last in the paradise forever. Shajaratul khuld. And you'll become two angels and you'll live here forever. You will never come out. He decorated the sin. And this is what a shaitan does. Very good at it. And we see this in more than one thing. A zina is called personal services. Right? This is how it is today. Drugs are given names like ecstasy. Ecstasy means happiness. It's given names like speed and ice. And these are all positive names. You wouldn't associate them with something wrong. And alcohol is given the name of spirits. Spirits, heck, as though if you drink it, your spirit would be uplifted. A shaitan's first thing he does is he begins to change the names. Homosexuality is called love. Love is love with a rainbow color. Heck, decorates the deed, decorates the sin. And people, bit by bit, they find themselves immersed in these kind of sins and acts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً. Whenever the people committed a fahisha, a moral, shameless, vulgar act, if a believer did this, the step after this is to repent and ask Allah for forgiveness. But these people, what they do, they commit the sin. The next stage is قَالُوا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا. They begin to say, our forefathers did this. This is called the process of normalization. They begin to normalize the sin. They say, what's the problem? We're doing it. Those in this country are doing it. Our neighbors are doing it. Other countries are doing it. And they all come up and they all support each other. So the fahisha is first done. Next, it's normalized. And the normalization process is a long process. We're going to explain how. Finally, you know what happens? They say, Wallahu amarana biha. It went from a fahisha to ascribing it to Allah and saying it's deen. And we have Muslims among us that fooled brothers and sisters, saying to them that this is not a fahisha. This is something that is permissible and halal in Islam. They ascribed it to Allah. Allah Azza wa Jal has already told us about this process. Wallahu amarana biha. The simple response was to say, قُلْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ أَتَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. You people are speaking out of ignorance, and we're going to highlight this ignorance bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So that's number one. Shaitan has a hand. This is how it goes from illegal to legal. Shaitan has a hand. Number two, there's a normalization process that, and it's continuing today, it's continuing. This normalization process does not stop. Everywhere you go, and in schools, it's in your face. This is all part of the normalization process. Finally, ascribing it to Allah, making it deen. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. And the third thing is, listen very carefully. Allah Azza wa Jal would say in Surah Sad, وَانْطَلَقَ الْمَلَأُ مِنْهُمْ أَنْ امْشُوا وَاصْبِرُوا عَلَىٰ آلِهَتِكُمْ إِنَّ هَذَا لَشَيْءٌ يُرَادٌ. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us about Quraysh. When their idols were being condemned and their idols were being detested, this is a shirk, this is evil, Al-Mala felt threatened. Al-Mala are the elite and the high people in society. They usually don't go down to do the work. They send their people. But when things get serious, they themselves come down. For Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, انطلق الملأ منهم. The big bosses, the big leaders, the elite, they came out and they began to march in the streets of Mecca. And they would encourage their followers and supporters saying, اصبروا على آلهتكم. Be patient upon your idols. Be patient upon the falsehood. Defend your idols. Be firm upon the worship of the idols. And this is exactly what Al-Mala did today in order to get what they've got. And that is that they are patient upon their falsehood. They are patient upon the evil. They are. Imshu wasbiru. Every single year there's a pride march. And even we're going to mention about the first incident of this march and how it happened. But the idea is there's this sabr ala al-ma'siyah. They have patience over their falsehood. Where is the patience of the believers upon the truth? Wallahi, if the believers had this kind of attitude and this strength and this patience upon truth, Islam would have filled the entire globe. My brothers and sisters in Islam, this is the quick history. And we're going to go from the end of World War II up until this day. So, of course, before World War II, homosexuality was a crime. It was unaccepted on all levels, morally, socially, politically. No one had accepted it, and it was condemned as a crime, and you'd be punished if you were to commit and engage with this crime. World War II ends, and that's the same story. World War II ends at about 1945. We move on. In those years post World War II, it's still the same, nothing changes until the 1952. 1952 comes in, and this is the year in which the DSM was first published. DSM is short for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is a book, it's a glossary of all the terms of mental disorders. It's written in this book, in this manual. These disorders are described, and then there's treatments and cures in this book. And this was recommended by the APA. The APA is short for American Psychiatric Association. They're the ones that recommended, when the DSM first was published, put in this book that homosexuality is a mental disorder. And so it was recorded officially in this DSM, which doctors would use all worldwide, that homosexuality was a mental disorder. That you people are approaching men with desire. He did not say to them, you're approaching men aqlan, with intellect. You're acting purely based on your desire. And if the desire has taken over, you are definitely in a state of drunkenness. They were inspired and moved towards their major sin because of their desire, not because of their intellect. Because I tell you why. Otherwise, the intellect, if you use the intellect, look what the intellect will say. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the private male organ and the private female organ for a purpose. Allah created them for a purpose. They taught us in school, in biology and in science, and I attended those classes when I was in school. They taught us that these organs are called human reproductive system. This is what they taught us. So the purpose of this organ and this organ is to reproduce. That's the purpose. So anyone who uses his organ for other than the purpose it was created, لَفِي سَكْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. You're not using your intellect. Imagine someone wanted to listen with his eyes, or someone wanted to hear with his ears. Imagine, Someone wanted to see with his E. You brought something close and I said, show me. What are you going to say about such a person? Maybe perhaps this is why the DSM referred to it as a mental disorder. Maybe. Because they couldn't figure it out. How are you using this organ for other than its purpose? And then the back passage was created for things that are in to come out. For the waste to come out. It wasn't created for foreign matter to go in. Unless it was a medical procedure. Like a colonoscopy test or something like this. That's all. Other than that, it's not known. This is not the purpose of these organs. And when you use your organs for other than what they were created, there is confusion in this. There is confusion. There is misguidance. There is deviance. Which perhaps now gives us a better explanation as to why it was first referred to as a mental disorder in 1952 in the DSM, which was first published in that year. So this diagnosis now of homosexuality being a mental disorder in the DSM was challenged by gay right activists at the time. Remember I told you, وَاصْبِرُوا عَلَىٰ آلِهَتِكُمْ. Look at the sabr they will have to continue going down until they get rights. 1952 until a major event happened in history. And this happened in 1969. More specifically the 28th of June. And this is known as the Stonewall Riots. It is also referred to as the Stonewall Uprising, and another name for it, and you'll see how incredibly relevant this is, Stonewall Rebellion. And this event that happened on that day, it is referred in history as the single most important event leading to gay liberation movement. This. And it happened in June. And this is why June is Pride Month. They celebrate this event. And then we need to know what happened on this event. It happened in June. This year was the 52nd year of celebration. It was a riot that took place between the 28th of June and the 3rd of July for a few days. It had happened in Stonewall, which is located in Greenwich, in Lower Manhattan, in New York City, on a street called Christopher Street. There is a Stonewall Inn. On that street there is a building. And this building was a private gay bar and club. And it was owned by the mafia. And the mafia would pay the police so that they can turn a blind eye and not come here. Otherwise they'll always go there and do raids and so on. Now, so we continue with the event that happened on the 28th of June 1969. And that is that the mafia would pay the police to turn a blind eye. And on the last week of June 1969, the mafia didn't pay. So the police came and made a visit to this private gay bar. They walked in and they requested from the patrons, the guests that were there, that they produce their IDs. Those that were cross-dressed, meaning males wearing female dressing, they took them to the bathrooms to check their privates. If it was a male organ and wearing female clothing, he's handcuffed and taken. That's the law. That's the law at the time. You must respect the law and be a law-abiding citizen. And this began to happen, and people are gathering. Almost 150 to 200 protesters gathered outside on that night. And bystanders would begin to shout, "Gay power, we shall overcome." And I tell you something, the one who's upon falsehood doesn't have an intellectual argument. If he doesn't get what he wants, he's going to get it with violence. You'll see who's violent now. And they began to scream in this manner. And the police were locked in the building. And these gay attendants managed to come out. The police were in there. They locked them in there. They set the bar on fire. And these police officers managed to escape. And the next night, 1,000 people came. And many more police came. There was a lot of police presence that night, in those days. To the point where they recall and mention a taxi driver, he turned into Christopher Street, oblivious to what's happening, had no clue what's happening. And they stormed his car, began to rocket up and down. And later, he was scared, they saw him scared. He managed to escape. Later on that day, he died from a heart attack. This is documented. بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ. Violence. They almost killed police officers. They killed the taxi driver. No one apologized for him. No one ever made an issue about that. They broke the law. They knew they weren't supposed to be doing what they are doing, but they broke the law. Why doesn't anyone hold them to account? And I tell you this, my brothers and sisters in Islam, wallah, if you go onto Google Streets, and you go onto the street, and you do street view, and you zoom into it, right next to Stonewall, there is a poster that says Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center. It will be opening on the 28th of June 2024. Yeah, this is going to be, they're making a monument now. Something that can be always remembered, that this was the greatest event that brought our liberation about. And underneath the bottom, wallahi, this is written, 55th, because in 2024 it will be the 55th anniversary of Stonewall Rebellion. Rebellion. They're not celebrating victory. They are celebrating rebellion, which is what Lut alayhi salam said. بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ. Rebellious people. They are proud of their rebellion. They only got their so-called rights through rebellion and violence. That's how they got the right. The rebellion was so intense that even in 2019, in June, the New York Police Commissioner, he formally apologized to them for the actions of the officers. Weren't the officers doing their job? What's the apology for? Did they apologize for the family that the taxi driver they killed and caused his death? Did they apologize for the trauma they caused the police officers that night that were doing their job? Shuf a rebellion, you'll see it. Anyway, a few years go by, 1970, 1971, 1972, the movements are growing strong and strong all around the world. There's now a group in Berlin coming out, in Germany, in Paris, in Spain, in France, parts of New York, many states. The movement started rising out of nowhere and joining hands with each other. We said to you, اصبروا على آلهتكم. See this? Watch how it's done. In 1973, the gay rights movement began to protest against the APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association. They were protesting against them for them to remove homosexuality from the DSM and do not consider this a mental disorder. Remove it as a mental disorder. This is what they wanted. Until 1974, in where the APA recommended that homosexuality be declassified as a mental disorder, and it was renamed to sexual orientation disturbance, meaning only who comes and complains about an urge he has and he doesn't feel right, we'll diagnose him with a mental disorder. And if you feel good about it, you're spared. There's no issue here. And why did they change it? They say that there was no scientific evidence to support that this is a mental disorder. Shuf. Science is the religion of the West. And don't get me wrong, we benefit from science where we benefit from. And if it goes against the Quran or Sunnah, then definitely we detest it and we do not accept that. However, science is their deen. And science doesn't make a link between homosexuality and mental disorder. Therefore, they removed it. And gay activists celebrated the removal of homosexuality from the DSM. And they declared victory and they were chanting on the streets, we won, we won. And then the APA published a position statement that urged people to end anti-homosexual discrimination and called for the decriminalization of private sexual acts between consenting adults. This is what they published. And also, the APA also made it clear that it did not endorse the view of homosexuality, that it was a normal variant of sexuality. They still said this is something distorted. But okay, we remove it from the DSM, it's no longer a mental health or a mental disorder. But look, I tell you something. When they called for decriminalizing, listen, when they called for decriminalizing private sexual acts between consenting adults, that only removes children out of the picture. So it continues to say that pedophiles are criminals, but it doesn't remove incest. So can you see the hypocrisy? Because if a brother and a sister, or a father and a daughter, or a mother and her son were to say we love each other, we want to sleep with each other, then based on the definition that they said, they're permitted to do so. Because they said decriminalizing private sexual acts between consenting adults. That only takes out the pedophilia, but it doesn't take out incest. Why am I saying this to you? I'm saying this to you because you're not going to find a firmer stance other than Islam. So look at this, and we're going to go with them as we go ahead, go along. From the DSM, you'll find that there is hypocrisy. You people are saying that any two consenting adults, it's fine, but then you're coming and you're saying that اللي هو incest is a crime, an imprisonment of up to 8 years. So it doesn't make sense. There is hypocrisy in that which you brought out to the world. You'll realize only Islam has the strong stance, no compromise, and there is no hypocrisy whatsoever. In 1980, the DSM that was published in the 1980 changed sexual orientation disorder, and now it was reworded to say ego-dystonic homosexuality. What's ego-dystonic homosexuality? There are two words here. There's ego-dystonic, and opposite to that is ego-syntonic. Ego-dystonic is if you have a habit, or if you're tempted to do something, and you want to be distant from it, you hate it. Ego-dystonic. And ego-syntonic is when you have the homosexual urge, and it's part of your system. You love it. So they said, now it's called ego-dystonic homosexuality, meaning whoever wants to distance himself from the homosexual urges or feelings he has, we're going to say he's mentally ill, and the other one that loves the feeling, that's fine, he's not mentally ill. In 1987, more and more protests, اصبروا على آلهتكم, ego-dystonic homosexuality was removed from the DSM altogether. But the treatment was still there. It was mentioned, there was a treatment for it. And mental health professionals could still diagnose LGBT people with a sexual disorder. In 2013, the DSM, edition number 5, that did not include any diagnostic category whatsoever. And in 2013 is the official year which homosexuality was completely removed as a mental disorder, a category as the treatment and the cure, everything was gone. Complete removal in 2013. And here in Australia, for example, December 2017, just a couple of years after that, the right to marry in Australia was no longer determined by sex or gender. See how quick this was? You see how quick we went from illegal to legal?